We start tonight's broadcast with some breaking news. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are currently holding a phone call. The call is likely to focus upon ending the 3-year-long war in Ukraine. Well, as of now, we are waiting for information on what the two leaders spoke. But ahead of this very crucial, this very important phone call, there is an interesting statement from the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said, Western dominance is slipping away. The Russian president says the G7, which includes the US and the UK, is too small to see on a map. Putin then quotes hard facts. He says the GDP growth in the G7 countries for 2024 was just 1.9%, while the BRICS countries saw a growth rate of 4.9%. Well, that's what Putin said ahead of the call, but let's now talk about the phone call which is currently underway between Trump and Putin. We have confirmation from the White House that the phone call began at 1400 GMT and so far it has continued almost for an hour. White House says that the talks are going well. Information is slowly trickling in at this point of time. Remember, the last time the two leaders spoke for 90 minutes. Before the call, it was reported that Putin will demand a halt on all weapons supply to Ukraine during a 30-day ceasefire proposed by Trump. During the weekend, Trump said that Moscow and Washington are talking about dividing up certain assets such as territory and power plants. The statement raised concerns in Kiev and European capitals that Trump could cede too much ground to the Kremlin. Ukraine has agreed to the truce plan, but it all now depends on what the Russian President Vladimir Putin wants. Both Kiev and its European capitals are saying that Putin is stalling the truce. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he had spoken to Trump ahead of his call with Putin. Starmer says that he urged Trump to keep Ukraine in a strong position during the conversation with his Russian counterpart. But is Ukraine in a strong position? These are the maps of Russian control in Ukraine. Moscow has occupied swathes of southern and eastern Ukraine. US has made it clear that Ukraine would likely have to cede land in any deal with Russia. Trump has hinted that division of land will be one of the key agenda of talks with Putin. Reports suggest that the Trump administration weighs recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. The Russian president has agreed to the ceasefire, but he has raised questions on how it will be implemented. But to agree to truce, Russia will seek freezing the Ukrainian battlefield with 20% of the territory that Russia holds in eastern Ukraine to remain a permanent Russian buffer zone. Putin will also seek a formal treaty with the West that bars Ukraine from NATO membership. A permanent truce, not a 30-day ceasefire that helps Ukraine regroup and rearm. Russia will seek an end to the supply of Western weaponry to Ukraine and also a fair division of land and assets. And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is now joining us on the show. Hi, Susan. Trump and Putin are currently holding a phone call as we speak. While information on that is still awaited, Putin ahead of the call said that the Western dominance is slipping away. At this point of time, Susan, like I mentioned, that the information is scanned. Do you think that the call will be able to achieve Trump's campaign trail promise of ending the war? And what kind of pressure will Trump put on Putin to end the war?
Right. Well, Donald Trump right now at this point really is putting an option in front of Vladimir Putin, either sanctions or escalation. And both of those doesn't seem to be favorable to Vladimir Putin, despite the fact that he does seem to come from a position of power in these negotiations. Remember, just a few days ago, they pushed back Ukrainian forces from Kursk, and it's said that Putin is going to want Kursk back, definitely, and not give in to Ukrainian demands in, that kind of border settlement. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect, as you mentioned, whether or not Donald Trump has the cards or not. His cornerstone financial backplay, so to say, has been tariffs. With tariffs is not going to work on Russia, considering the fact that imports from Russia to the United States are already at an all-time low. He could tighten sanctions, but considering the fact that most of the countries in the global south, and to an extent Europe, which doesn't get reported much, is still trading with Russia, those sanctions have to be very tight. Biden administration sanctions, while they have been crippling for Moscow, they haven't really stopped Moscow's quote-unquote war machine, as the West likes to call it. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a will from Vladimir Putin and whether or not there is an incentive in any way for him to stop this war. He said that he's optimistic, but there are media outlets here who are saying that ultimately it will be Ukraine which will have to give in the most if some kind of negotiated settlement is reached. Another issue is this 30-day ceasefire. Vladimir Putin is skeptical because he thinks that these 30 days are going to be used to rearm Ukraine. On the other hand, the Ukrainians and the West are concerned that these 30 days are going to be used for Russia to once again regroup, regain, get help from its allies, and, a sense of escalation will dominate. So the logical thing would be for both sides to come to the negotiating table and find a settlement. But you can see how there is so much mistrust from both sides, and whether or not Donald Trump can play as an honest broker is yet to be seen. But it appears he's the only person in the West that's willing to bring these two to the table and at least talk about a ceasefire. For the past 4 years, and of course even now from the European sides, it's just fight until the very end.
Right, Susan, we'll wait and have to see the outcome of this high-stakes phone call between the U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart. But thanks very much for joining us on the show and sharing your insights.